Hey folks, welcome back to part 2 in making an axe sheath. Our pieces are now dyed and we are now ready to start making the welt and stitching it up and finishing this out. So we now have our two pieces dyed. They look pretty good. First thing we're going to do is use this. Now this is a leather burnishing tool. What I'm going to do is burnish all the edges that aren't going to be stitched. So I'll use one of these radiuses and just rub it back and forth, and what this will do is it'll kind of smooth over that edge and give it a nice polish and nice smooth feel. It's definitely an optional thing to do, but I think it looks and feels really nice. So, alright, so now everything is burnished. It's time to start making our welt. Now what the welt is it's a piece of leather that goes in between these two pieces to protect the stitches from getting cut. Some people choose to make templates for these things, but I find I get the best luck just using the actual sheath. Okay, we're running into a few camera malfunctions, but I hope that we got all that. Anyway, we have our welt right here. All I did was I traced around this piece to get the outside shape of it, and then I laid the axe on it, and about ½ of an inch back from all the edges I traced around the shape of the axe. So pretty simple. Now what I'm going to do is along all the outside edges I'm going to leave a little bit of wiggle room, and then we're going to cut this out. So I'm going to get the inside on the line so the axe fits in very well, and then the outside I'll leave that little bit of wiggle room so I can trim it all down later and I don't run into the issue of it being too small, because that would be a bummer. So now we have our welt. Here's the one piece, fits on well. What we're going to now do is keep this on here. I'm going to use my handy dandy awl and I'm going to poke all the stitch locations. Now we have all our holes marked. Now I'll go over to the arbor press, and just like we did when punching these holes, I'll go ahead and punch these all out. And just like that, we have all our stitches. The next step we're going to do is we're going to break out the leather dye again, and I'm just going to dye all the inside edges and a little bit on each end of where the sheath is going to actually go. The reason I'm doing that is so when you look in the sheath, there's not this bright white hide staring you in the face, just like that. While we're waiting for that to dry, what I'm going to go ahead and do is, in the last video I forgot to film putting in this hole, but basically I just took these pieces, folded the flap over, and determined where I wanted my little posts to go. So what I need to do now is put in that little copper post. So these are the little copper posts that I use. You can see there's two pieces. Something I like to do first, just because I've had issues with them in the past, is just screw it together and make sure it's going to screw together smoothly, because we don't want it to get stuck halfway through and end up having to somehow take it out. Put the threaded portion in the back here, check one more time, and then we'll actually super glue it on there. Yeah, that should be great. Little dab of knife maker magic potion here. Now you gotta work fast, otherwise the glue's gonna bind up, but just take it and screw it down, and voila, we have a nice little button post. Now something that I've started doing is I'm going to take a really thin piece of leather and make a little dyed square out of it, and then just super glue it onto the back so this post does not scratch the axe. There we go. Now we have a nice little protective covering over that piece of metal so it does not interfere with the axe at all. So everything is at the point now that we can start stitching it up. I'm going to use some thin black thread, and I am not the one to tell you how much thread you should use, because I always seem to either overestimate or underestimate how much I need. And then this thread is actually thin enough to where I can tie it on to the needle, which makes life a little easier. Thread this puppy on here, and then I'll just wrap the tail end around a few times. And then I'll just stick it through that first loop, and then that gives it a nice little secure knot. Okay, so now comes the labor-intensive portion of stitching this all up. I'm going to start at the bottom and end it at the top. That's just personal preference. You can do whatever you want. We're going to be doing what's known as a saddle stitch, which means we're going to be bringing one side of the thread through, then making sure the ends are equal. We're essentially going through one side and then the other with the thread. Now, one thing I like to do is the first stitch hole, I'll go back and then forward again just to give it a little extra strength. Basically just do this stitch till we get to the end, and then in the end I have a cool way to end the stitching that's very secure to where you can't see how the stitch ends. So we've stitched up all the way to the last stitch. Now here is how I hide how the stitch ends. So what you got to do is you got to go through the previous hole, except as you can see here it's poking out, but we don't want that. We want it to stop before it gets to that other side. We're coming up the middle essentially. So now we have our thread running out between the welt and the side piece. Now I'll do the same thing on the other side, except keeping it on the same side of the welt, just like that. And now we have our two pieces that are completely hidden. Now what I'm just going to do is tie a knot, just an overhand knot will do. That'll lock those into place. Then I'll put a dab of super glue over that knot and then cut them off a little bit before the outside edge. And that is a really, really good way to end your stitching. Once the glue's set, to trim it, I get it close with the knife, and then I do the rest on the belt grinder just like we did in the last part when everything got sanded down flush. Everything has now been trimmed, and it's now time to just add a little bit of dye to this edge, and then once the dye has dried, then we'll burnish the edge just like we did previously, and then we'll poke a little hole in the right spot to receive that button, and this will be pretty much all done. Okay, we're just going to fold the flap down, feel where the post is with our finger, and then go back up just a touch. And that'll give us the location for the hole. So we'll punch that hole, and then we'll make just a little slit going up from that hole. Let's go ahead and make sure the axe and everything fits perfectly. And it does. Little to no wiggle room on the sheath. Alright, there we go, folks. The axe sheath is now done. Hope you enjoyed watching that process. If there are any videos you would like to see in the future, please let me know. And on that note, I hope you have a great rest of your day.